Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to show you how you can add a menu to Google Sheets so that way if you've created your own macro or if you found one on the internet that you want to use, you can link it to a menu so that way you select the drop down and make your selection. So I'm going to go into AppScript to get started. And so one thing you need to do is set up the user interface, and then once you've got that done, then you can link it to macros that you use. I'm gonna keep it really simple, and I'm just gonna have these macros just have pop-up boxes. So I'm gonna call the function on open, so that way when the sheet opens up, it's going to run. Otherwise, you'd have to create a. Otherwise, you would need to set up an event so that runs when the file opens. But if you just call it on open, then that'll mean that it'll run when you open up the Google Sheets file. So the first thing I need to do is set up a variable for the user interface. So var UI equals spreadsheet app dot get UI. And so we've set up the user interface. And the next thing we need to do is actually create the menu. So UI dot create menu. And the name of the menu, I'll just call it my menu. And then now beneath that, what I'm going to do is add an item. So I'm going to call one macro one. And then for the function name, it's going to be called macro one. So just keep it really simple. What I'm also going to do is show you some other options. So we can add a separator. And that way, so we just have a line below that. And you can also create sub menus as well. So to do that, there's an option to add a sub menu. And in this case, it's going to be UI. Again, creating another menu. And this time it'll call my sub menu. So creating another menu beneath that. And again, I'll add an item below there as well. So add item. And this one will just be called macro 2. Macro 2. Close that. And now, once we're done, the last step is to add all this to the UI. And now that's where we actually close out the code. So let's just make sure we've got everything closed out. I think I've got an extra item here. Actually, we needed to close this one out here. So I had an extra parentheses there. So that looks to be okay. Now, the next thing I need to do is actually create functions for macro 1 and macro 2. So function macro 1. And this is going to be pretty straightforward. It's just going to do spreadsheet app dot get UI dot alert. So alert is the same as a pop-up box. So I'm going to say this is macro 1. That's it. And I'll copy and paste. Do the same thing for macro 2. Just so we're not overcomplicating it here. And so just to make sure everything's mapped properly. So when this file opens, going to run this function, so it's going to assign the UI to the user interface, create a menu called my menu, and add an item called macro 1, which will run the macro 1 function over here. Then we're going to add a separator, so another line underneath that, and then create a sub menu called my sub menu, and in there there's going to be an item called macro 2, which is going to link to macro 2. And the last thing you do is add all of this to the UI. And so just line this up a bit better. And the other thing to note is just to make sure you've got these macros, these functions set up. So I'm going to save this, and now let's test it out. So I'm going to refresh the file here. And it may take a few seconds for the menu to load. Like right now it doesn't show up in here, but as it's refreshing, there we go. Now it pops in. So we've got my menu. So we've got that separator line right here. So macro 1, that's what I named it. So if I click on this, we see this is macro 1, so that's working properly. Go back into here, go to my sub menu. There we see macro 2. Click on this, and it says this is macro 2. So working properly, assigned, and so that's how you can set up those menus. So this is where, you know, if you find code on the internet that you want to use a certain macro, you know, paste it into here, into your code, and then just link to that macro. That way you don't have to worry about setting up triggers or setting up buttons or anything like that. Well, you can do them through the menu, so it makes it a bit easier to run any sort of macros. So if you find something online that you want to use to add to your Google Sheets file, that's how you can do it, and then connect it all together by creating the UI and the menu buttons to make it easy to run. So that's how you can do that in Google Sheets, and hope you found this useful.